Hi everyone, this is Christine with LeftSideArt, and today I have a new art journal page for you. I am working in my Diane Reevely large journal book. It has pretty thick mixed media paper, but even for as thick as mixed media paper is, I do glue two sheets together just to support the heaviness of my layouts. I add a lot of molding paste and heavy embellishments, and this just helps keep the pages a bit stiffer. What I'm doing here is our first step of creating your background. I have torn out some old book pages and just laid them randomly. I also tore apart some plain washi tape by Dina Wakley and just put it here and there throughout my background. And then I took one of her leaf stencils with light molding paste and a palette knife and applied some of that pattern around my background. After this all dried, I went in and with some white gesso just covered my pages. This helps the pages become less porous, so you end up using less paint and less ink, because otherwise the paper just kind of soaks it up. You might notice on the left hand side of this layout there's a big crease going down my page. When I was gluing the two sheets together, I did not, I guess, let it lay flat enough to dry, and when I closed the book up, I caused a big crease. But I ended up incorporating this into my background, and you can't even tell by the time I'm done. I moved some of the gesso around with a baby wipe. You could have done this with a paintbrush or with your fingers. I just didn't want it too opaque because I did want some of the book pages to come through. You could have also used some of the Tim Holtz tissue paper that you normally see me use, or magazine scraps, whatever you might have. After that's all dried, I laid some magazine papers behind my two pages just to protect the rest of my book from overspray. The spray that I'm using here is by Tim Holtz. It's a distress spray stain called Faded Jeans. And because I applied gesso on my background, I'm able to easily move that around with a baby wipe. I just keep layering this ink until I am happy with how dark it is in some areas, and I want to keep the center of this layout relatively light. The paint I'm using here is also by Tim Holtz. It's a distress paint, and it's called Blueprint Sketch. I'm just using a little bit of a sponge-like material to apply it. This was easier than using a brush, only because I wanted to catch the surface of the molding paste that I have, that leaf image. This sponge is I think it's called Cut and Dry sponge. I'll have links to everything below. This green is Lucky Clover by the same line of distress paints. These are the same paints that you may have seen others use with more of a dauber type of top. The newer ones, I guess, come out with a flip cap. And this gray one I'm using is Hickory Smoke. I applied this one straight with my fingers just because I was going for a little bit of a different effect. It was really easy to apply the blue and the green with a sponge rather than my finger, because even with all this molding paste and stuff on here, your finger gets a little tired going across those rougher surfaces. This is just cheap acrylic white paint, I think by Deco Arts. And I'm using a little bit of water mixed in with it. If you used a distress paint in white, it's already pretty watered down. You really don't have to use much water at all. And the splatter brush I was using is also by Tim Holtz. He has a video on a couple of techniques with using this brush. You can also just use regular paintbrush and make splatters, but I feel like I have a lot better control over where my splatters are going and if they be large or small, just with that one brush. It's not really a brush, it's more like a tool. The bristles are stiff and long, and they're not like a regular paintbrush. These are little distress inks, and then I have a couple dilutions in here. I use the same Beta Jeans color and then this black by Delusions. You could use the distress ink black too, but I just happen to have this right here. And this little dauber I'm using is also by Tim Holtz. It's the mini one because the larger one is more of a rectangle. I like this mini one because you can store the little pads underneath each of the mini distress pads or distress containers. Just makes it easy to find your colors and not have to go looking for them. And also the mini one is round, which I think it gives a better effect. Now I'm just going back through adding a little bit more white, again with that sponge, through the center of my layout here. I was going through some different techniques. I wasn't too sure what I wanted in my background. I ended up just lightening it up and staying cohesive without adding those big round blobs of white that I had on there for a second. Okay, now that I have my background done, I'm going to move on to our second step here, which is creating a focal point. And because this journal does fold in half, you have to be aware of the crease. And I lay my elements in a way that when I go to fold it, it can still fold, if that makes any sense. I didn't put any big heavy metal embellishments right down through the center, and I carefully positioned some of these thicker cards even around that crease, and by having my accidental really big and noticeable crease to the left there, I think this made it a little less obvious that I was you know, kind of working around the center of the book. This is a tag that I just created by using leftover paint from creating this same background. I just kept wiping it off, and same thing with the stencil, and I ended up using it in my background. I'm using gel medium to glue my lighter embellishments down. These photos came from a Tim Holtz set. I don't have the packaging anymore. And then I had the thrift shop package and then botanical for some additional little flourishes here and there. That black paper, those 3 strips you see there, is just black cardstock. I'm using a bone folder. You can use a roller or paintbrush or whatever you have to go up and down that crease. And I kept checking to make sure my book can close and that when I reopened it, things weren't popping off the page. I went through this quite a bit back and forth while gluing these little layers down. You can also use your own photos or photos out of a magazine. I just like the black and white look to these photos, and for what I was going for, it worked out well. And even though I'm doing this layout for March, it is very warm here in Florida where I'm located, so you're almost always thinking about the beach, and I had no problem working with girls in swimsuits rather than, you know, something snowy for this layout. In order to make my layout look cohesive and not just 3 photos slapped down on my background, I used flowers from the same set and balanced them on either side of the pages. I used the black strips, the pages from the book, and a few little other embellishments here and there just to tie it together. If you're having trouble with your layout, getting it to look like it all belongs, try repeating the same element a few times throughout your layout. And also, one thing I like to do is stick with either things going horizontally or vertically or both, or maybe instead of that, using the same 3D element in a lot of different places. A lot of my other layouts have gears throughout. Just keep repeating it and you'll notice it does help things look like it belongs. And now I'm adding my message down underneath my hand there. It's called Collect Beautiful Moments, and it's just a nice little tag that I found through the Tim Holtz chat books. This is the splatter brush again. You can see it's more like bristles or something on this connected to the handle. It's kind of hard to explain, but I added a lot more white splashes on top because I already had them in the background, and I thought that that also helped tie the images into the background. Notice in the background too with my vertical white streaks I had done earlier, it kind of plays into the tall skinny white flowers and also the vertical black piece over to the right. I use Eileen's tacky glue whenever I'm having trouble getting things to stick, or if they were bigger and heavier embellishments like the metal and wood pieces. Now I'm going through with Tim Holtz Distress Crayons. I love these things. They have a different type of property from other materials I've ever used before, where the pigment will not move unless you move it with your finger. It's friction based, so if you apply it and you don't do anything with it, it'll just stay there. And it eventually kind of dries, and to reactivate it, just add a little bit more pigment and you can rub it from there with your finger. You can also apply water to these and get them to move a little bit more like a watercolor. And the ones I'm using here are from packages 1 and 3. So I just took some of the colors that I thought blended well with my background and added it to the top of my collage here to again tie it together. I added some blue, some of the green, and then I went in with a little bit of gray, and then the black I think really finished tying things together. I added this black around the front edges of the pictures, and I think it kind of made it look like it was even more old and worn, and just kind of brought together that look I was going for. I also use this black here and there for shadows, and in areas I couldn't fit my finger, I just took a relatively dry brush and just kind of moved the pigment underneath certain elements. And then my center got a little darker than maybe I had originally planned for, so I went around and did what I usually do, which is add a little bit deeper, darker border to my page. I also rubbed this crayon across the top of the molding paste with that leaf pattern here and there to really finish tying everything together. I think this last little touch with this black is what really completed this piece. I went in with a Sharpie white paint pen. This is a water-based one, and just added some highlights here and there on the flowers and the embellishments. But this about completes this layout. I hope you've enjoyed it. If you need to know the materials that I used, I'll have everything listed below. You can also get free downloads of this image for your computer, laptop, phone backgrounds from my website, which I'll also have linked below. And finally, I started a Patreon page. So if you want these videos a lot slower and a lot more descriptive on what I use and how I use it and why I'm using it, please head over there, and I will see you next time. Thank you. Bye.